morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. A little bit of an issue there on DawgNation.com a moment ago, but it seems like everybody's good and ready to go and now fully loaded in what we're doing here. So across all video platforms, glad you're here. Fun show for us. Connor Riley stops by here in a little bit. Connor, a little critical of me, but I'll fire back at that criticism. All in good fun coming up in just a little bit. Word of warning about the game coming up against Kentucky on Saturday. We'll do some of that on the program today on a number of fronts. But I do believe that game in Lexington on Saturday also provides a pretty good showcase for a position group that could be just this close to breaking out. We'll tell you what we know about that on the show today there as well. So much good stuff going on. So glad to have you with us for it all. So what do you say we get rolling here today? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, so I want to begin today with maybe a little bit of a word of warning. And one of the great things about doing this job is, man, it's really fun to talk about Georgia football because obviously in most days and most situations, the news is just always really good. And admittedly, the show is much easier to do, probably much more fun to do when you have this sort of constant stream of good news. And yet when the news is different, you know, we have an obligation to come in here and tell the truth and sort of say what it is. That way people will believe us later on when we are celebrating good things. You have to have a certain degree of, I guess, honesty about everything in order to really be able to properly participate in the best things that kind of go on. So with that in mind, I have to admit that I have a little bit of I guess, an intuition about Saturday. You know, I talked to John Stinchcomb yesterday about the notion of a hunch. You know, sometimes you just sort of have a little bit of a feeling, and the feelings oftentimes turn out not to be true. I mean, for me, you know, my hunches, my intuitions are wrong frequently. So the extent to which you kind of buy into what I'm saying here is certainly your choice. I'm not telling you have to. But I am going to have to tell you the way that I feel because that's just sort of the backbone of this show, my opinions about how things are going with Georgia football, starting a conversation that we all kind of participate in together. So here is the way we'll begin it today as Georgia gets ready to go on the road to begin SEC play on Saturday. I have a sneaking suspicion that Saturday is not exactly going to be a thing of beauty. And over the course of the next few minutes leading into Connor Riley, we'll give you a few reasons as to why that is. We'll also kind of spin this in sort of a positive way for Georgia there, too, in light of what I think might be true. Then what could Georgia do to make the best of that here on Saturday? But to begin with, I think it's important to understand that this is sort of the kind of spot where maybe not always the best of Georgia. When you look back over the years with Kirby Smart, I mean, what I have Georgia as, you know, trying to do the math, you know, kind of on the back of the cocktail napkin before the show began today. This is the game before an off week for Georgia. And the 2024 season is one of those weird sort of calendar anomalies where you have 5 Saturdays in November, which means that in order to have the SEC championship and the other conference title games be the first Saturday in December, you've got to extend the season a little bit to kind of get there. So therefore, you've got the extra bye week. Georgia also had this as well as the rest of college football in 2019. And now we kind of cycle back around, and it's time to do this here again in 2024 there as well. And so this is one of 2 off weeks next Saturday that Georgia will have here in the 2024 season. And for whatever reason, at least from like a point spread perspective, or think about it differently if you don't care about gambling, from a meeting expectations perspective, this is one of those spots on the schedule in which Georgia frequently has not been at its best. As I said before, trying to do kind of the math in the back of a cocktail napkin before the show began today, I've got Georgia as 1-8 against the spread in its last 9 games under Kirby Smart, the week before an off week. And y'all, to be totally honest, some of these have been real clunkers. Outright loss to Vanderbilt in 2016, 3 touchdown loss to LSU in 2018. Last year's Vanderbilt game was a little bit messy. Remember Kentucky in the rain in 2019, how ugly that was? Remember, Kentucky on the road in 2020 in a game that had almost no offense to speak of whatsoever. Like some of these games the week before the off week, and a lot of that's ahead of the Florida game, but some of these games for Georgia have been really pretty bad, at least in terms of like meeting expectations, going into an off week before what oftentimes is a much bigger game after that, typically Florida, or in 2019, you also had the off week ahead of the game there against Notre Dame. So on Saturday, I would say that the prevailing wisdom ought to be that maybe this is sort of once again perhaps going to be true. I mean, the only time in which Georgia covered the spread, at least based on my data information, going into an off week in the Smart era was the Vanderbilt game in 2022 when Georgia won like 55-0 or whatever. Other than that, all of these games going into that bye week have all been closer than the experts thought they were going to be. Several reasons perhaps this is true. Georgia, obviously, when you get to that point in the season, typically knows it's got a lot more to play for than just this particular game. And we also know that Kirby Smart sort of values the idea, you would presume anyway, of getting a little bit of rest when you have the opportunity to do that. You remember the old basketball thing about, we don't hear this as much anymore, I don't think, but it used to be one of those real talking points during a broadcast. The color analyst might say that the coach was an expert when it came to the difference between real time and game time substitution. In other words, if you take a player out near the end of the quarter or ahead of a TV timeout or something like that, not only do you get a little bit of time off the floor, but you also get that tacked on to some time when rest is also occurring while the game's not being played. Just a difference between the real-time substitution and the game-time substitution, that you may only take a player out for 30 seconds of a basketball game, but if that comes in a span of a couple of minutes where the game's not also being played, that's just extra rest and, at least theoretically, an extra benefit for the player there as well. I think for Georgia, it's the same type of deal here. Part of the reason in which Georgia typically hasn't met expectations in these games just prior to a bye week is because I think the sense that we have is that if Georgia has a chance to rest that injured player for one more Saturday and give him 2 full weeks of rest to kind of benefit during that time, that's sort of what Georgia's going to do. So if you think about the Mikael Williamses, the Warren Brinsons, some of these guys are on the fence about maybe they play, maybe they don't. I think ahead of a game like this on Saturday, the honest truth is they probably won't play. And Georgia obviously looks ahead to September 28th against Alabama, where you want to be as healthy as you can possibly be. So if Georgia has a chance, thinking as more than a 3-touchdown favorite, it should be able to beat Kentucky no matter what. Then I do think, whether he would ever admit this or not, and clearly Kirby would not openly acknowledge this, but the results certainly indicate this is a choice that Georgia's made, is you just give guys rest. You go in there, you get the win, you survive, you advance, you move on, and hopefully you are healthier for the big game you're looking to play 2 weeks ahead. That's just sort of typically been what Georgia does. But in the midst of all of this, I think there is still a chance for a real positive scenario for UGA to emerge in a game like this, because oftentimes these games for Georgia against Kentucky are hard fought, they are physical, and the fact that Kentucky did not look good at all last week against South Carolina, I actually don't think changes this fact very much ahead of this Saturday's game. But understanding the fact that we have a little bit of a template that's been established for Georgia against Kentucky, I think that what we see Georgia do in a game that has a tendency to feel a little bit like a bar fight, a little bit like a, kind of a backroom brawl, kind of a fist fight here, how Georgia approaches a game like this could be pretty illustrative of what Georgia's also going to do for much of the rest of the season. And to me, it could be a showcase, sort of for the first time, to see the best of the Georgia running game at full strength. We haven't seen that a lot yet this year. Trevor Etienne didn't play against Clemson. There wasn't much need to kind of put the full, power of Georgia's running game on display against an overmatched Tennessee Tech. But Etienne did flash and look good in his first game in a Georgia uniform. And now more of a guy like that being required against Kentucky, and in a game in which, hey, maybe Georgia's not, at its prettiest or at its best. Maybe this is a chance for Georgia to sort of get back to being RBU once again. That's actually my kind of like, I guess, positive a hope for the game on Saturday is that in a game in which I'm guessing Georgia's not putting up 50 points and not throwing the ball all over the yard and certainly not pushing the limits of its overall performance, that it could perhaps be a showcase for the Georgia running game. And if you want to go back to Saturday in the post-game press conference for Kirby Smart after Georgia beat Tennessee Tech, while acknowledging, this opponent we just played is not very much, Kirby is still as optimistic as ever about what Georgia's running game can be this year and the overall stable of backs that he has in that room. This is what Kirby Smart said about that topic on Saturday.
I think we've got really good stable of backs. I'm fired up about our backs. I've said repeatedly to you guys that we got a great group, good young, good old, good leadership, good depth. I felt really comfortable there all year. I still feel that way, but I can't put a significance of impact on what he did today because I don't know that it mattered which back was in there.
Motivated and dedicated watching us on YouTube says when it comes to Saturday, run it and then run it some more. And I sort of have a feeling that might be the overall approach for Georgia here this week because as of now, I sort of still think the passing game may still be a little bit of a work in progress. I think they're still trying to figure out how to have the best overall chemistry there between Carson Beck and the guys they're throwing it to. We'll get more into the weather part of this here coming up in a little bit, but it just sort of screams to me Saturday being a game in which maybe there's fewer points, maybe Georgia's winning by a smaller margin than the experts are anticipating, but in the midst of all of that, maybe it's a day to showcase everything that Georgia can be this year with its ground game. Because, by the way, it's not just Kirby Smart who's really, as Smart says, fired up. That's an interesting phrase for Smart to use. For a guy in Smart who, at least in terms of his relationship with the media and his public persona when he's not coaching on the sideline, Smart tries to be a little bit even keel. We see him fired up all the time during games. We don't see him fired up as much away from the actual competition and away from the actual sideline. But in that particular clip you just heard, Smart says, I'm fired up about these Georgia running backs. And one of the guys who blocks for those backs, Xavier Truss, met with the media yesterday. And in Truss's telling of it, he thinks when he looks back there and sees the guys who are toting the football for the Dawgs, he says, this is the best group in the country here right now. This is Xavier Truss on the topic of the Georgia running game.
I'm extremely impressed. We had a great fall camp. I got to see, especially a lot of the young guys get to go out there, Nate Frazier, and just show the talent they got. I think we got the best running back room in the country, and as long as we do our job up front, we'll get to, showcase those guys for all season.
We did not see probably the best of Nate Frazier on Saturday, and to say it once again, probably didn't need to against Tennessee Tech. But you did see more from Branson Robinson. He got a touchdown. He is working his way back. It's a remarkable recovery from injury for him. And with each week, he seems to be getting healthier, getting more confident. So you pair him with what Trevor Etienne is, with what Nate Frazier can be, what he certainly showed against Clemson. All of a sudden, you sort of see now why the confidence level that Smart and other Georgia players have in this running back situation, why it is so high right now. And beyond all of that, the kind of playing personalities, the preferred style for each of these backs provide such an interesting contrast with each other. That's the other thing that could potentially make things tough for Kentucky on Saturday, is that depending on who's running it for Georgia, who's carrying it for Georgia, such a completely different skill set for an opposing defense to have to deal with. This is something that Chaz Chambliss knows full well from kind of doing battle with these guys during practice all the time. And when he also yesterday had his chance to talk about the Georgia running game, that was also something that was on his mind as well. Here's Chaz Chambliss, the Georgia linebacker, on this same topic.
You have guys with speed, you have guys with power, you have guys with a mix of both. They can hit you in the pass game, they can spread you out, go man on man. Inside the tackles, every single running back we have can read the holes, they can hit holes, they can bounce it. You just see the best competition every single day.
So I'll be totally honest here. Some of my purpose for this topic here today is to sort of get out in front of something, because I don't want 2 weeks of not the prettiest game in the world, Georgia not winning by the most impressive margin in the world, Georgia making Kentucky perhaps look better against it than Kentucky looked against South Carolina. I'm sort of trying to get in front of this here a little bit because I really don't want, if we can avoid it, I don't want 2 weeks worth of negativity going into the game against Alabama on September 28th because we all have to have our game faces on for that. Just being totally honest here, I have an ulterior motive. I have an agenda with this topic here today. I'm trying to get out in front and remind you that week before a bye week, a lot of times Georgia's been, not its prettiest. Not the most dominant win, not the largest number of style points, not the showcase of, fireworks and laser show and things like that. And on Saturday for Georgia, that might once again be true, especially since, and it's a weird irony, right? Because so frequently Georgia plays Kentucky in November ahead of that, or late October ahead of that bye week before usually playing Florida. Here, lo and behold, they have a very strange September off week coming next Saturday. And once again, weirdly, they're playing Kentucky very early in the season, right before one of these bye weeks. So it's the spot on the calendar. It's the fact that it's a team that Georgia a lot of times looks pretty sloppy against, or at least not its, most precise and its overall best against. This sort of feels like to me a game on Saturday where there are fewer points, a smaller margin of victory, and the kind of thing that's just less exciting than maybe what Georgia did 2 weeks ago when it blew out Clemson in such a big stage, high-profile type game like that. So we may have to look a little close to sort of see the best of what Georgia is putting on display against the Wildcats. But if we do look close, and if we see a big performance from Trevor Etienne and Nate Frazier and Branson Robinson, if the Georgia running game appears to be kind of firing in all full cylinders in that spot in Lexington on Saturday, that becomes a very fun thing to consider about how it could pair with a passing game that's growing and seemingly also trying to get better each week, that eventually Georgia might have the left-handed punch and the right-handed punch and the ability to knock out a lot of the teams that it's playing. But on paper, this has a chance to be the best running game and the best, most versatile collection of running backs that Georgia's had in a good number of years. And seeing a glimpse of that this Saturday against Kentucky, that could certainly be a lot of fun. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. We are glad you're with us, no matter how you get to us. Live on video across all platforms, 10 a.m. Had a little bit of an issue to kind of get things started today with our folks at DawgNation.com. We do a little bit of a pre-show to the show if you're watching live. Now, if you check us out later on, like, say, the YouTube page, we kind of take that out because, our research says people kind of like the show to be a little tighter, a little shorter. But if you join us live, we just kind of like to kind of interact. And, listen, I'm always out there pushing my bosses. I want to be as interactive as we can. And, yeah, the show sometimes goes on a little long because of that. But we want to get a chance to sort of have some time to be with people and talk to people. And so we'll do that with you 9:50 in the morning across all platforms if you ever get the chance to join us live. I realize like 99% of you never will, but if you do, we're always thankful that you're there. We give you a little extra content for those who do get a chance to show up live. But the point is, a little bit of an issue there at DawgNation.com. Seems like we got that squared away, and now we're on and popping with everything else with the program here today. And, of course, a huge thanks to our friends at ServPro, who make it all possible. For the radio audience, for the podcast audience, and everything else, our folks at ServPro are just doing great work for you. They're also providing the game ball to us on our DawgNation postgame show each week there, too. So a big part of DawgNation Game Day, but every day is game day for the restoration specialists at ServPro when it comes to dealing with your damage caused by, like, fire or water intrusion or something along those lines. If you have a mess like that, well, it's a huge cleanup. And if it happens to you, what you want is it all put back together like it never even happened. That's what our friends at ServPro are all about. So I want you to find them online, servpro.com. That's S-E-R-V, servpro.com, S-E-R-V, for more on that. Make sure you check our folks out at ServPro here today. All right, we've got Connor Riley here coming up in a moment. Let me also remind you about this, and we can bring our banjo down now. If you go to DawgNation.com/tailgate, speaking of the big one coming up a couple of weeks from now, you can get more information there about our DawgNation invasion to Tuscaloosa coming up. It's going to be just a huge, huge event. Obviously, we include the DawgNation Invasion t-shirt and all of this. You get the big thing going down on Friday, there on Saturday there as well. In fact, let me give you all the details on this. If you're one of the first 150 to sign up, you guarantee yourself a DawgNation Invasion t-shirt. That's a really good thing. And the package that we're offering here includes a 2-night stay at the Hyatt Regency in Hoover, Alabama. We'll take you to and from Tuscaloosa there, going to the game. Also, we get a Friday night football party at Dave & Buster's, and then the all-inclusive pregame tailgate there as well. Now, we are almost sold out on our hotels there on this because, as you know, we announced this back in the summer, and so a lot of folks, as soon as they hear this, are kind of jumping on that. Now, some folks like to make their plans a little later. Frankly, sometimes I'm a little late making my game day travel plans. I'm like some of you on that, but a lot of folks have already acted quick there on this, and so they are locked in and ready to go. So don't miss out on your chance here. Go to DawgNation.com/tailgate to find out more about this. That's DawgNation.com/tailgate, and you can be a part of all of that. And if you don't need a hotel room, if you just want to be a part of the tailgate, we can sell those for you there too. Once again, DawgNation.com/tailgate. Very, very close to Bryant-Denny Stadium, just a couple steps away. Just a lot of fun. Our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips are helping power all of this. So make sure you check out DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. All right, let's get ready to go around the doghouse before we talk to Connor Riley here. And once again, not to put too fine of a point on this, but if you want to have even more, I guess, evidence of why maybe Georgia, not exactly its prettiest on Saturday against Kentucky, given the recent history of Georgia in these games prior to bye weeks. Another thing that Georgia could have to contend with on Saturday is the weather. And I told you before, I'm not always great about making my travel plans very early for a lot of these games. I'm also notoriously bad for not really paying attention to the weather as much as I should. I wasn't even aware of the fact that they're predicting, I guess, the potential pretty bad weather on Saturday. Kirby Smart was asked about that yesterday. He was already prepared on this and fully acknowledging that Georgia's doing everything it can to deal with whatever elements it might be provided there on Saturday. More from Kirby Smart on that topic. This is from yesterday.
Yeah, we look at it last night and start tracking it each and every day. We do every 2 weeks wet ball drill and practice with wet balls, and like we're going to play in the rain. And we've been able to practice some this year a couple times in the rain. And sometimes the weather up there, typically it's later in the year we play them, and typically it's much colder, which we've had some really tough games up there in the cold, in the wind. This year it looks like there may be some inclement weather, and we've got to prepare for it.
So it's funny that Smart says it that way, because when I first saw the 2024 schedule, I was really excited about the Kentucky game being much earlier, because I will tell you, many of you, I think, probably feel the same way. Kentucky's really a beautiful state, and the drive to Lexington, I like to drive. The drive to Lexington's really pretty. You get up north of Knoxville, kind of going through the mountains. If you've never been to Kentucky before, Lexington's a good bit easier to get to than you might think. It's not super close, but it's also not a million miles away either. You get up north of Knoxville, you're pretty much, basically almost there. You just got a little bit of drive through the mountains there, but it's a gorgeous drive, a very pretty state. The university community around Lexington's really nice. I was really looking forward to being there earlier in the year with the hope it might be nice weather, because as Kirby says, oftentimes when we've been there in the past, it's been really cold. And then lo and behold, now Georgia's going there in September. Now it's maybe, rainy, windy, things like that. So some plans perhaps maybe, not quite as, I guess, fully filled out as they could have been for, people enjoying game day and things like that. If the weather is this bad, maybe that's going to be the case. And the other thing kind of comes up here is not just the rain, but the potential for wind there too, because I think almost any quarterback will tell you is that the wind is actually worse than the rain when it comes to trying to get a passing offense going and things like that. So perhaps something to think about. And then like the final point I'll make on all of this is that most of us have been around college football long enough to know is that from week to week for most of these teams, you don't know what you're going to get. The very best teams in the country almost always play well. The very worst teams in the country almost always play terrible. You may see weeks and weeks and weeks of fairly consistent play from both ends of the spectrum, but in the middle, and Kentucky, one way or another, is sort of in the middle of the college football, kind of landscape here. In the middle, from week to week, who knows what you're going to get? So this idea that just because Kentucky played really bad last week, they are now going to play really bad this week, that conventional wisdom in college football does not often hold true, even though the level of opponent for Kentucky just gets way harder having to play Georgia. Assuming that you're going to get a bad game for them simply because that's what happened last Saturday, college football has never been that easy to predict, nor will it ever be quite that easy to predict. So that's just sort of the way that goes. So get ready for, I think, an interesting battle. Get ready to deal with some weather. And hopefully, as we said, maybe Georgia can showcase this talent there at the running back spot. That could be one of the things that makes this Saturday a lot of fun to see. And that is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. All right, before we're done, a few things we got to get into. Some other games from Saturday we still haven't quite talked about yet. We got a great collection of golden shoes, including some of y'all celebrating some really good news. So we'll do all of that here before we're all said and done. But for now, what to expect versus Kentucky, kind of where things stand with Georgia here at the moment. And, by the way, a little bit of a strong retort to some criticism I've received in the aftermath of Saturday's win for Georgia against Tennessee Tech. Let's do all of that here right now with Connor Riley today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, we're going to talk to Connor Riley, and obviously we got a lot to do to get ready for Kentucky. But a lot of people are saying that I've been unfairly criticized, and I don't pay too much attention to what the media is saying. But in certain situations, I feel like if I hear the same thing enough, then maybe I ought to mention. And people are saying, BA, they're giving you a hard time for things you don't deserve. So let me show you this on the screen. I believe we have this. So this is Connor Riley from Saturday. So he's obviously retelling an event from the game. Branson Robinson, 13-yard touchdown to cap off a nice 69-yard scoring drive for Georgia. Bulldogs now covering what he calls, and some of the other folks in the press box on Saturday also mocking me. Not the only drama in the press box, but a little bit of mockery of me. He says the official line was 52.5, but obviously last week on our show Go With The Flow, which airs on Friday, because the other line wasn't out yet, I had to make up my own line, and I made up a line of 44.5. At this point in time, Georgia gets the 45-0 lead, covering that spread, ends up winning 48-3, also covering the 44.5 I put up. Now, I was wrong about the game. I was the only one to take Tennessee Tech plus the 44.5. But, Connor, here's what some people are saying. That my line was obviously far better for this game. The one that I sort of handicapped out of thin air was far better than the actual official sportsbook line, because 52.5, frankly, was never a conversation in this game. This game never approached that kind of number. But yet, for most of the fourth quarter, even in the shortened version of it, we were sort of teetering back and forth of, would Georgia cover the 44.5 or not? So even though I got the pick wrong, people are saying that I handicapped the game perfectly.
BA, I'd pat you on the back, but your hand's already there. But I will say that the BA book, great week by them, great call by them. You happen to be on the wrong side, but you could not have been more right about the actual number. I will give you some credit there. Look, some of us tried to make the case on the front end that this game should not count because at the time, understandably, we could not find a line. And so if you elect to not count this on the official Go With The Flow predictions, I have no qualms with that. I would just like to be recognized that my initial stance that the game should not count was also correct.
Well, maybe that is the case, but it kind of leads us into the thing against Kentucky too, because it's been a little bit of a theme for me. And, gosh knows I don't want to ever be the wet blanket here, but I sort of had the thought that, okay, well, Georgia showed what it needed to against Clemson. You got the big win. Everybody's fired up, and, Georgia fans are sort of hungry for what comes next, right? You get an appetite to keep watching Georgia play this way. But for me, this is also that moment. We saw this in 2022, and Georgia, dominated through the 2022 season. I thought you had a really good point about how, good that team was in light of what we saw from Michigan on Saturday in one of your pieces at DawgNation.com over the weekend. But also in a season in which Georgia was winning its most important game so thoroughly, they weren't great against Samford that year. They weren't great against Kent State that year. They probably did a little bit of load management, maybe, if you want to, at least mentally, when it came to playing some of those lesser opponents. And post-Clemson, pre-Alabama, this was sort of a spot I kind of wondered, is this a little bit of a kind of a natural lull for Georgia? Now, 48-3, there's no problem with that against Tennessee Tech, of course. But moving ahead to the game against Kentucky on Saturday, I gave the numbers a little earlier. Georgia does not have a great track record of exceeding expectations week before a bye here in the Kirby Smart era. And once again, I sort of wonder, Do we see sort of just enough from Georgia on Saturday, injured players being held out, game plan being kind of modified and perhaps watered down here a little bit, all in anticipation of 2 weeks from now being at your absolute apex, your absolute best against Alabama, and that somehow that Saturday sort of feels like just sort of a survive and advance type game for Georgia against Kentucky? What say you about that?
Yeah, normally I'd agree with you. And because just I think with what Kentucky showed last week, it's hard for a team to be that bad 2 weeks in a row. Like, I think it's fair to expect that Kentucky's going to play better. They're going to be at home this week. Georgia hasn't scored more than 20 points against Kentucky in Lexington since 2018. So it's not like they've necessarily gone in there and lit up the scoreboard. The one maybe thing that maybe gives me pause as to why this might not be a close game or, a game where Georgia's ever really sweating is just because Kentucky's offensive line is so poor. And it was last year, and I think it's even worse this year based on what South Carolina did to it a week ago, that if Georgia's able to get consistent pressure with the guys that they do have there on the defensive line, and I think that they will be able to, it might not matter who's back there at quarterback. You could give them Carson Beck, and I think that they would still struggle offensively with what they have in front of them at the offensive line position. So I think that this is a game where Georgia could name its score if it wanted to, but it's probably not going to try and strain too hard. It knows it's an off week coming up next. Try and get in and out, make it a quick game, and minimize any sort of injury risk or other things, because they know at the end of the season as well, there's no style points from potentially beating Kentucky team that might be lucky to go bowling this year. So I think that this is a team in a spot where if you're Georgia, like, sure, a comfortable win would be nice, but I don't think they're going to beat them 51-13 like they did last year in Athens.
So I'm obviously not a coach, so I don't have the ability to properly game plan, but it seems obvious if I'm Kentucky, and we talked about this yesterday, if you care about like the Pro Football Focus grades and things like that, some of the Kentucky offensive linemen were laughably low in their performance against South Carolina. Dylan Stewart was all over the place for the Gamecocks here. So your offensive line is what it is. It's really hard to scheme around that if you're Kentucky. But given Vandagriff's skill set, given the offensive line limitations, it seems like one of those deals where they're going to probably try to snap it fast, get rid of it fast, get the ball to the outside, away from where you think the strength of the Georgia defense might be, and kind of force those Georgia defenders to go chase them down a little bit, even though obviously Georgia's got amazing speed. When it comes to that type of thing, to my eyes, and I'm no game planning expert, but to my eyes, it sort of seems like if you're Kentucky, that's kind of the only thing that has a chance to work. And if nothing else, at least maybe you're kind of shortening the game by trying to go extended handoff, quick hitter passing type stuff. It seems like that's their best chance to maybe be successful. Is that your read on this?
You think of using Brock Vandagriff, I think, like how, say, Georgia Tech used Haynes King last year against this Georgia defense. I think move the ball quickly, get the ball out, run Brock Vandagriff probably a little bit more than you would necessarily like, or throw Gavin Winsett in there to run the ball as well. But I think there's one key difference from last year's defense to this year's defense. And actually, Jamon Dumas-Johnson sort of illustrates it a little bit now that he's going to be playing for Kentucky. But I think the middle of this Georgia defense, when you factor in the safeties and the linebackers, is just so much faster than it was a season ago. And they're playing a lot quicker as well. I think that shows up when you look at the just added experience that C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson bring to the table there. When you have Smallman, who is healthy, whereas he was not a season ago, you have a guy like Jalen Walker who you can move around. Malachi Starks, Janelle Aguero looked like he was shot out of a cannon to start on Saturday. They have so many guys in the middle of that field. It does sort of feel like a remastered Georgia defense, so to speak. And so I think that with what we've seen so far, and look, obviously, I don't think Clemson is a great offense, despite what they did to App State on Saturday, and I don't think Kentucky is either. But I think in terms of raw talent, this defense is closer to what Georgia had in 2021 than it is in 2022 or 2023. Now, that's not saying this team is going to be the 2021 defense, but at least in terms of raw speed, in terms of ability to cover, in terms of ability to get out to the outside and try to limit some of those quick hitters that you saw, I think teams find success against Georgia last year. I think that this defense is a little bit more cooked up to be able to slow some of that down. And so that's why I think it's going to be a really, really difficult day for Brock Vandagriff, because things that I think would have worked last year against this Georgia defense are just not as easily exploitable because this defense moves so much faster.
I want to ask you one more thing before we get to Brock Vandagriff, to go back to sort of my general theme of, what Georgia may be planning to do. I'm assuming, and you can certainly tell me if I'm wrong about this, I'm assuming that anyone who's on the fence is probably not playing. Now, we'll also get an injury report, or an availability report, I should say, later on this week. But I'm assuming no McHale, no Brinson, no Delp. I guess he said Delp is fine, so maybe he plays. But you tell me what you sort of think the injury outlook probably looks like for Georgia ahead of this particular game.
Yeah, I think they probably do err more on the side of caution. I wouldn't expect to see Michael Williams. When we saw him yesterday, he was still in a walking boot. I don't expect to see Jordan Hall this week. I think they want to get him as close to 100% as they can going into that Alabama game. I think they might actually play Warren Brinson a little bit, if only because this is a guy who missed a good chunk of camp. It's a guy who got hurt on the second drive there against Clemson, and they want to try and get him some reps to at least get in better game shape. And so I think that he's a guy, he dressed out last week, and so if Georgia potentially needed him, he could have gone, I believe, but he did not play in that win against Tennessee Tech. And so because of the opponent this week, because also I think they want to try and limit the number of snaps that guys like Nas Stackhouse and Christian Miller play over the course of a season, you might see Warren, if this game is competitive early, get some more snaps in part to get his conditioning level up. But ultimately, I do largely agree with you. I think they're going to have a short leash on some guys. They're not going to want to overextend. And the guys that are already a little bit banged up, your Michael Williams or Jordan Halls, I think that they're going to err on the side of the caution, knowing they have a bye week. And then coming out of that bye week, they have that game against Alabama. And I'll be interested in seeing how exactly detailed the injury report is, or the availability report, is for Georgia when it gets released on Wednesday night. It wouldn't surprise me if Kirby Smart goes full Bill Belichick and says that Carson Beck is probable with the shoulder, because that's famously what Belichick did with Tom Brady. And so I'll be interested in seeing how Georgia goes about using this availability report and what all is on there.
In other words, more names as opposed to fewer on something like this, just as a way of kind of keeping the gamesmanship alive. You had an interesting piece at DawgNation.com this morning about Georgia's history with five-star quarterbacks, and the fact that, if I'm saying this right, every five-star quarterback who's been at Georgia during the Smart era have all eventually transferred. And, from my reading on this, Connor, I think it's interesting, and this Saturday I think it's a perfect example of this. This started off as a pretty controversial thing. You maybe to a certain extent with Jacob Eason. Certainly by the time you got to Justin Fields, it was very controversial about, what Fields' role would be and the way in which Fields left, the fact that he went to a place like Ohio State, which was such a, high-profile, type of team. This at one point in time was a very big deal. And yet when you get ready to play this game on Saturday, I don't think this is controversial at all. To a certain extent, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, sort of the same type of deal here. But Brock Vandagriff was a five-star. Based on what I was told from people who sort of know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, very popular with his teammates, had a lot of very close friends among this team, well-liked and respected, had a chance to be the starting quarterback. Carson Beck was just the guy they selected. And Vandagriff said, okay, well, I'm just going to go play over here. And it seemed like everybody shook hands on their way out the door here. And, obviously when you win 2 national championships, some of that kind of stuff starts to feel a little bit different. But it's interesting how the Vandagriff, in one respect, is kind of a continuation of what has been a narrative for Georgia, but the actual feeling around it could not be more different. You agree with that?
Yeah, and I think the perhaps biggest reason for that is just the fact that Georgia has now won a national championship, and it helps. I think that the fretting over five-star quarterbacks, I think that's an example of, if you're able to win with Stetson Bennett and his recruiting backstory, then this idea that you need this five-star program savior, like, say, Nico Amiliava. Sorry, Kaylee, if I didn't get that pronunciation correctly. Those types of players to save your program. Georgia doesn't need that anymore. And so, yes, you love the raw talent, the upside, the tools that those types of players bring. But at the same point in time, I think that Kirby Smart has shown that he does, in fact, have an eye for quarterbacks in terms of what guys are able to do at the position and what guys are able to bring. Because one of those five-star quarterbacks was JT Daniels. And yes, he was 7-0 as a starter at Georgia, but there was just something that Stetson Bennett brought to the table that JT Daniels in particular did not bring with him. And so I think that time has obviously helped this. And timing is a big factor in why some of these five-star guys work out and why some don't. When Georgia was making its big run at Justin Fields and recruiting him in that summer prior to the 2017 season, I don't think anybody anticipated that Jake Fromm was going to start that game against Notre Dame there in week 2. And so timing, I think, gums so much of that up. As much as we sat and talked about Brock Vandagriff when he committed in February or January, rather, of 2020, I don't think anybody envisioned Carson Beck becoming potentially the best quarterback in all of college football. And so timing factors into all this. Injuries play a part in it as well. That's why I think Jacob Eason and JT Daniels didn't necessarily work out. And at the end of the day, it's hard to argue with the success. It's not like Georgia's gotten bad quarterback play from the guys that has played over these 5-star players. Jake Fromm won the SEC as a freshman. Stetson Bennett won 2 national titles and was a Heisman Trophy finalist. And as I mentioned earlier, I think Carson Beck can be the best quarterback in the country this season. So it's hard. This becomes a much less strenuous conversation when you factor in that Georgia has now won national championships and that the guys that Kirby Smart is playing at quarterback are delivering both in terms of team success, but also individual success as well.
Yeah, I think it remains to be seen how good offensively Georgia's going to be here this year. But in kind of the post-Stetson Bennett era for Georgia, I think one of the things we've undoubtedly seen is that Georgia's quarterback situation just sort of gotten more normal. You have a veteran starting quarterback. You have the next oldest guy sort of waiting the wings. He appears to be the backup. A transfer's come in to compete. We'll see how he eventually fares. There's a young guy with a big arm who has maybe a bright future. You've got, recruit, with all apologies to Ryan Montgomery, skip ahead to Jared Curtis in 2026, who may, be very, very, very good, one of these days. It just sort of seems like the pecking order kind of favors seniority a little bit now. All the guys seemingly have talent, and it's just sort of an open competition that seems to be producing somewhat sensible outcomes. When Fromm sort of skipped the line because of the Eason injury and went on to have great success, and yet Georgia still brought in, Justin Fields, and then you had the pandemic, there was this weird sort of 3-year period where the quarterback situation, and it's not necessarily anybody's fault, it just sort of what happened. It was just really chaotic and really weird, and Carson Beck himself has chronicled how weird that was when he first got here. Well, over the course of time, things have just sort of gotten more normal. We'll see what the results end up being, but Georgia has a quarterback situation now that to me sort of feels like quarterback situations are supposed to feel, where the veteran player leans on his experience, he becomes the starter, and then it's sort of the next man up after that.
Yeah, it's funny how, I think Stetson Bennett, for all that the discourse that went around him in his time here at Georgia, he brought stability to the Georgia quarterback position. Again, it seems preposterous to think this now, but Kirby Smart's first 2 years at Georgia, he was starting a true freshman at quarterback. And now the idea that a true freshman is going to come in and play at Georgia just seems really far-fetched. And then you have Justin Fields, where there were people that wanted to start him over Jake Fromm in 2018 there. And so I think with Stetson coming in and him really just sort of taking the reins and saying, you're going to have to drag me out of this job, I think it helped get Georgia on a more normal timeline. It allowed Georgia, I think, to establish a more natural order of succession in terms of the way that they want to do things. And because of the fact that he had spent those 2 years as a starter, it sort of allowed Georgia to reset its clock in terms of the way they go about recruiting. Because I think early on, and Kirby Smart has learned more from this in the process as well as he's gotten more experience as a head coach. It's really hard to sign elite prospects every single year at quarterback because all those guys are going to want to play. And then when those guys transfer out, that leaves you with holes in your depth chart, like you saw in 2019 when Jake Fromm and Stetson Bennett were the only 2 healthy scholarship quarterbacks that year. So I think that now you're in a little bit more of a normalized process where you have Carson back, you have him as a 2-year starter. Gunnar Stockton is right now the favorite, I think, to be the starter next year, and he'll have a 2-year window. We'll see what happens with Jaden Rashada, Ryan Puglisi. We'll see what happens moving on down the line with Montgomery and Jared Curtis there as well. But they finally, I think, in large part due to Stetson Bennett, have been able to sort of stabilize the quarterback position, and that makes something like Brock Vandagriff transferring out seem like a much smaller news story, whereas as someone who was with DawgNation when the Fields news all happened, seemed like a cataclysmic event.
All right, so let me finish with this, kind of away from Georgia here for a moment, although I guess somewhat related to Georgia because both these teams are on the Georgia schedule. I thought both Texas and Tennessee sent really significant messages with their wins this past weekend. Texas has not had a lot of opportunities to be a favorite on the road against a top 10 ranked team. Whether Michigan deserves that ranking or not is obviously a different conversation, but that's what it was coming into it. And Texas won easily. And Tennessee completely blew out a Power 4 conference opponent on a neutral site. And they did so really with defense more so than offense. That defense was really good for them on Saturday. I think that what we saw from both Texas and Tennessee makes the Georgia schedule now seem in some respects even tougher, or at least it validates the talk about how tough it is. Maybe that's the better way to say that. And I think both those teams really kind of give you an indication of the role they're going to play in the overall playoff conversation as we kind of move through the regular season here. What did you make of kind of those two big results from week 2?
Yeah, it's a credit to Texas that they went into Michigan and took care of business there. I don't think that this Michigan team is championship quality. Certainly didn't even look playoff quality there with what they did against Texas. But you have to give that Texas team credit for really making that an uncompetitive game in the first half and not letting a Michigan team that still has, I believe, championship DNA hang around and find a way to find its feet late. And so there you deserve, I think, a lot of credit there. As far as Tennessee, and look, I think this is actually one of the bigger disagreements we have when it comes to, a threat level to Georgia. Look, credit to Tennessee for taking care of business and really dominating there. I do agree with you that if Tennessee's defense is going to play this well consistently, that does probably change their ceiling as a program this year. But don't sit here and tout NC State as a big win. That team is not good. I know Kaylee picked them as a dark horse team. I know my dark horse ACC team, Virginia Tech, lost to Vanderbilt in week 1. That loss in performance against Tennessee was far worse in my mind than what Virginia Tech did against Vanderbilt. Tennessee still has a lot to prove to me. Look, I know they're probably going to be favored when they play Alabama later in the season. They're going to win a lot of games. But when it comes to specifically being compared against Georgia, I have to see Josh Heupel's team do something different than it has done in the last 3 years, because at different times that program has been hyped up. There's been talk that this is a different team. It's a new year. They're having fun. Their quarterback could even maybe be a Heisman dark horse contender. And every single time that Georgia and Tennessee have played each other, it has been an absolute bloodbath. And until I see something differently on the field, I'm just not going to take this Tennessee team all that seriously in comparison to where they exist with Georgia.
I think that's a reasonable take as it comes to the comparison with Georgia. I think I'd probably agree with you on that. I don't think that Georgia's the measuring stick for them as of yet. But I'm going to tell you this right now. I think you're underselling the value of a neutral site win by that margin. I'll be frank, I don't know how many SEC teams would have been capable of doing what Tennessee did on Saturday. I don't know that Ole Miss could have done that. I don't know that Missouri could have done that. I don't know that Alabama could have done that. Texas probably could have. Georgia probably would have done that. Certainly would have had a chance to. I think that Tennessee is upper crust in the SEC right now. I do. Now, that may still make them 3 touchdowns worse than Georgia, but there are a lot of SEC teams that are trying to sort of figure out what their pecking order in this league is, and a lot of them learned on Saturday they're slotted behind Tennessee. I do believe that.
Yeah, and I think Tennessee could well make the playoff. It wouldn't surprise me, certainly after what I saw from Alabama against USF on Saturday night, if Tennessee finds a way to win that game, and maybe they're the 3rd or 4th team in the SEC to get into the college football playoff. I think Tennessee can still do that. But in the conversation of seeing them as a team that could challenge Georgia and win a national championship, because that's sort of the space that Georgia, I think Texas occupy there at the top, I need to see it there. And as far and like, I understand why Tennessee is able to go out there and look the way they do in some of those non-conference games. They did the same thing to Virginia a season ago. I think when you don't see this offense every year, it becomes hard to prepare for it. It becomes hard to play against. It's a little triple option-y in that sense. Obviously, it's very different schematically, but just in terms of not seeing this offense all that often. Whereas you look at the teams that have seen this offense and do see this offense more frequently, I know it's a while ago now, but Josh Heupel's teams at UCF, were getting worse every single year, in part because I think teams in that league got more familiar with his offense and figured out ways to go about slowing it down. So we'll see as they get into SEC play and start seeing some more regular teams that they face on a more regular basis. And I actually think that Tennessee, because of the new schedule and you're not playing the SEC East every year, that maybe that might actually help them because of the fact that you're seeing teams less often. But in terms of if Georgia and Tennessee are still going to play each other every year and Kirby Smart's still going to be the head coach, I'm not going to buy into the Tennessee hype. And part of this is not your fault, Brandon. It's the national media's fault that moves Tennessee up 7 spots in the AP poll because they go out and beat an NC State team that I frankly just don't think is all that good. And so part of this is naturally, I think, a reaction to people wanting to overrank and overhype a Tennessee team, in part because of their quarterback.
Connor, really fun stuff and very interesting. As I mentioned before, you're running some terrific stuff for DawgNation.com there as well. Great look at kind of the history of five-star quarterbacks. And I thought a really interesting point about, the Michigan blowout, and really getting, not quite blowout, but certainly handled easily by Texas. Certainly a remarkable contrast to what Georgia did in its follow-up to a national championship season there in 2022. I thought it was maybe the best point I, kind of saw over the course of the last couple of days. So really good stuff online at DawgNation.com. We'll enjoy your continued coverage from Athens. Obviously, we'll hear Kirby Smart again tonight. And then we'll talk to you, obviously, Saturday there in Lexington, and then back here next week at the same time on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro there as well.
Yep, as always, it's a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
There's obviously room for reasonable disagreement when it comes to college football, and I think that Connor is underselling what it means when you're about a touchdown favorite and you win a game going on 40 points or whatever it was. And listen, I don't take great pleasure in hyping up Tennessee, but we did sort of say this going into it, that we thought this would be, one of those things where Tennessee on Saturday would have a chance to prove it's pretty good. I think that's exactly what it did. Now, I don't mean scary for Georgia as of yet, because frankly, you could be really, really good and not quite be at the level yet of being able to scare Georgia. But, you don't want to make too much of a couple of weeks here, but there's no doubt in my mind that Tennessee through 2 weeks looks more impressive than Alabama. I do. I think that's the case. And, we'll see how the next few weeks of data obviously contribute to that. Of course, Alabama gets a shot at Georgia prior to Tennessee doing that. But I think that Tennessee has a look here right now of a pretty good team. And some of the teams we'll compare them to are in slightly more intriguing games on Saturday. And so we'll talk more about that here coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And for me, when it comes to making the most out of your vacation dollars, so let's just be honest here. I mean, that's obviously, when it comes to planning a vacation, you want your dollars to be stretched as far as they can go. One of the reasons why I've always loved Royal Caribbean Cruise Vacations and Utopia of the Seas, the ship we've been telling you about a lot lately, is the perfect example of this. It's just the perfect blend of just sort of everything, right? It's great for kids because you've got like the Splash Away Bay and you've got, the special areas sort of designed specifically for kids. It's great for like the moms and the dads because you got all the specialty restaurants and the bars and the lounges. If you got teenagers, sort of great for them. That Royal Caribbean says, we're going to do something here to just sort of make it for everybody. And whatever you kind of enjoy, whether it's the live music or the entertainment, the shows, or you like the Casino Royale, whatever your thing is, you get all of that on board a Royal Caribbean Cruise Vacations. One of the reasons why I always am so eager to recommend this, because I know that if you want a vacation, you want it to be a really special experience. And obviously that's what it's all about. And Jessica Slater can tell you all about it. Terrific travel agent, specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. She can get you booked up and ready to go. So give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can find her online, Jay Slater at dreamvacations.com. She'll tell you everything about Utopia of the Seas or the brand new Icon of the Seas, all the really fun stuff coming for Royal Caribbean. Perfect Day Coco Cay, of course. Also, brand new beach club eventually coming to Paradise Island there in Nassau, the Bahamas. That's going to be amazing. Just some really fun things debuting very soon here for Royal Caribbean as they continue to set the standard in terms of a great cruise vacation experience. All right, in a moment, I'm going to give you a couple of thoughts, early thoughts on the bigger games coming up here for week 3. Obviously, Georgia, Kentucky being a part of that. A couple of things from this past Saturday we haven't talked about yet that I want to. First of all, you talk about a heartbreaker. Maybe it's a heartbreaker for those folks who had Arkansas plus 7.5, one of the ultimate examples of kind of bad beat, which means a game that if you bet it, you sort of thought you're going to win the entire time, only to have it sort of slip away there at the end. Arkansas against Oklahoma State on Saturday, they were a 7.5-point underdog on the road. By the time the game is done, they gained hundreds more yards. I mean, they had a huge advantage in total yards of offense gained in the game, and yet somehow found themselves on the wrong side of the scoreboard after having a pretty sizable, at one point, like a 2-touchdown lead, gave the game away seemingly so frequently, almost lost it in regulation. You go to overtime. That's where Oklahoma State scores the touchdown, gets the 2-point conversion in the second overtime, and now all of a sudden they've got the margin. They actually cover in a game in which they were dead to rights seemingly the entire time. I mean, such a tough situation. And, it's kind of an example of the fact that the writing has sort of been on the wall here that Sam Pittman's about done at Arkansas. It just seems to be the case. This is one of those things where if you have any chance to kind of buy yourself some wins, because SEC play is going to be tough. If you have any chance to buy yourself some wins, a game like this against Oklahoma State is sort of where you need to get it. And they had it. We hate that for them. Hate it for Pittman in particular because we've always been big fans of his. He was a major, major part of the early days of the Kirby Smart era and just sort of a fun personality. But if you can't win this one, given the fact that you had everything going for you, then the honest truth is it's probably about done for Pittman there at Arkansas, and I take no pleasure in saying that. Auburn also suffered a bad loss on Saturday there as well. They were about a 2-touchdown favorite at home against Cal, and they were never the right side in this game. Cal just looked like the better team and maybe the physically tougher team. Just a pretty rough situation. Peyton Thorne is not a good quarterback, and I don't, once again, take pleasure in saying that, but he's just not. It's a real mess. And, I'm always interested when the overall, recruiting momentum and the off-field momentum seem to be so different. And right now, that's the case. Auburn's going to end up with one of the best freshmen in the SEC when it comes to Cam Coleman, at least on the offensive side of the ball. And if you look at some of the work they're doing when it comes to high school football recruiting right now, they are killing it. They're going after it, and they're taking players from Alabama. They're becoming kind of a factor on the trail. So there's some clear momentum there. And yet none of this is translating on the field at all. So here's where it's, I think, very important not to have too big of an overreaction, which is that Auburn is fairly obviously operating on kind of a long-term trajectory here. I think they're kind of putting some things together to try to make a run a little bit in 2025. I think they want to be a contender in 2025, and I believe they feel like they can perhaps do that. Pretty clearly, they just didn't think they had the ability to do that here this year. That's why they seemingly settled on a guy like Thorne at quarterback, even though they had evidence a year ago he wasn't very good. Stick with him here for this year, and somehow is even worse there on Saturday. So, once again, not everybody's a point spread player. Not everybody cares about that. But if you do, keeping in mind that Auburn just may not have much going for it this year and maybe kind of okay with that because of what they think they can be next year, maybe you find the opportunity. Because in the past, jumping on Auburn in a game like this at home was, of course, the right thing to do because Auburn always played so well in its home games. Well, this year, not even that is a given. And in fact, maybe the exact opposite, given how easily Cal stepped in there and won that game this past Saturday. But don't be so quick to assume that somehow Hugh Freeze is a dead man walking and somehow Auburn's just biding time before, they do what we think that Florida may eventually do with Billy Napier or something like that. I believe that Auburn feels like it's got the access to NIL dollars, enough building blocks with a couple of the guys on the roster, a chance to be very aggressive in the transfer portal. I believe Auburn's sort of buying its time and perhaps buying a lot more than that to make a big run here in 2025. But this may end up being one of the worst teams in the SEC here this year, at least based on that performance against Cal there on Saturday. As far as a look ahead now quickly to when it comes to some of the stuff in week 3, I think Alabama needs to play better. They did not look good to me on Saturday against South Florida, and the final score, doesn't do much to obscure that, even though the final margin actually was a little larger than at one point in time it appeared that it would be. Going to Wisconsin, this is in Madison, on the road there. I'm assuming Wisconsin does not have much for Alabama, but I can't be sure that we're going to see a crisp thing of beauty from the Crimson Tide. Week 1 against Western Kentucky, they were motivated and fired up to kind of give Kalen DeBoer a good debut. They could not follow that up this past week. I think much the same way that Georgia's in sort of tune-up mode ahead of the game against Alabama, how much is Alabama in sort of tune-up mode ahead of the game against Georgia? Very different type of situation, traveling way up north to Madison. Seeing Alabama in that spot could be really interesting. And a big flip of the script for South Carolina now getting a chance to host LSU. We talked about this yesterday. Game day is going to be there. But let's look at the LSU side of this here for a moment. They were pretty sloppy against Nichols on Saturday, believe it or not, after having lost to USC. This is a messy operation here right now. And, Brian Kelly just weird, right? He said even some weird things in the last couple of days there as well. Like his sarcastic sense of humor just does not translate very well. It just doesn't. But he's got a good quarterback in Garrett Nussmeier. And assuming, we'll assume here that Nussmeier, is certainly a stiff challenge for South Carolina here this week. But obviously, Gamecocks want to build on their momentum from last week against Kentucky. LSU wants to kind of show they want to even be a factor here in this 2024 season. I think this is a pretty fascinating game here for week 3. The only top 25 matchup in the SEC for this upcoming week is Boston College. Believe it or not, they're in at 24 right now, going to Missouri. This is a Missouri team that had a lot of love in the wintertime, coming off a bowl win against Ohio State, a big record last year for Eli Drinkwitz, and now they have like playoff aspirations and things like that. This is a Boston College team we saw just really push around Florida State on Labor Day night. This may be sneaky, a pretty interesting game there too, to see what Missouri is able to do against a much stiffer level of competition than what they've played thus far this year. Keep your eye on Ole Miss here a little bit. Dave Clawson's Wake Forest team is not what it once was, but Ole Miss has been an absolute bully to 2 overmatched opponents there in Oxford the first 2 weeks of the season. We had the Rocky Boyman thing yesterday that he said on our show Friday about Lane Kiffin denying the chance of the running clock against Furman. Now they go on the road. Can they make it look as easy? 3rd week in a row, different level of competition, different venue after a couple of, kind of roller skating games at home. Could be interesting. Could be interesting to see there on that. So some fun stuff involving SEC teams as you head towards the upcoming week, and we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean here today. Let me also give a shout out to our friends at Cercheros. Cercheros is a big part of our DawgNation game day coverage and a wonderful part of your game day there as well. If you're getting together for a watch party or a tailgate or something like that, because they have great catering options when it comes to groups of 10 or more people. They can provide the delicious, fresh Tex-Mex food in which Cercheros is famous for. They can give that for you for any of your big events, including anything you got going on a college football game day. Cercheros got several convenient options when it comes to online ordering, pickup, and delivery to fit all your game day needs. It's fresh Mex made right for you, whether it be burrito bowls or the quesadillas or whatever else. Just delicious stuff. 25 different toppings to choose from, getting the most out of every single really menu item. Cercheros is all about that. They're Georgia grown. They got 30 locations all across our state. So make sure you check all them out there online at Cercheros.com. That's Cercheros.com for more on that today. All right, we got a handful of golden shoes to give out here today. Let's begin with this. I got this from Brandon Perkins in Johns Creek. I love seeing y'all show kind of your dog cave stuff here about the way in which you kind of honor UGA down in your basements, things like that. Brandon emailed me to say nothing like the first weekend of the year getting to watch some DGDs on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Go Dogs, hashtag golden shoe. So how about this? The framed Todd Gurley jersey, that's autographed. The A.J. Green, the Roquan Smith, the Jordan Davis, the Hines Ward, the Sony Michel, the DeAndre Swift, the James Cook. All of these jerseys there in his room and all the frame stuff from all the great Georgia wins. How great. And the pool table, what an unbelievable basement that Brandon Perkins got going on there. Brandon, I love to see that. Thank you so much for sharing that. What a cool thing that is. Well-earned golden shoe coming your way there for that. Also, Hunter Jones, we showed this the other day when his baby was born, and now he shows off Truett making his Georgia game day debut. Woke up early, ready to eat. Get the Power G hat. You get the really cool onesie that looks like the Georgia football. I mean, like an actual football. He says the red old school dog socks. Amazing stuff there from Hunter, and we'll give a golden shoe out to his growing family there for that. Also, a few days ago, JT shared this with me, and y'all will never know how much I love when you share good news in your life. Obviously, we're here for you if things aren't going well, but when you got really good news to share, man, that's great to see there too. And JT shared this. He says, me and my wife excited to add our newest addition to DawgNation, hashtag golden shoe. What a beautiful baby. Great looking Georgia clothes. How about the Georgia bucket and the Georgia football there for the pictures there too? Really great to see JT's family grow in there as well. I'm a couple of days late on this, but well-earned golden shoe for him there on that. What a wonderful thing that is. And then Greg Hendricks shared this. Somebody's meme online where they said, man, I've had a terrible day already. I had 2 Kentucky football tickets this weekend sitting on my dashboard. Then somebody broke in and left 2 more, which is obviously a very funny joke about the current state of Wildcats fans here right now. I love that from Greg Hendricks. Well done there. We'll give him a golden shoe. Also, our buddy Warrior Manatee Jetpack on X providing some details yesterday of the situation involving Fran Brown and Brent Key. So what Warrior tells me is that Fran Brown wasn't happy because I guess Brent Key acted like he didn't really know him very well when they were coaching together at Western Carolina. And then Fran was unhappy because Brent Key had talked about how much he hated Georgia. So that was enough for Fran Brown to get fired up for that game this past Saturday. So interesting stuff from Manatee Jetpack on that. So we'll enjoy that information and give him a golden shoe for that there as well. Lousy, stinking Gators, 1,403 days. That's how long it's been since they've beaten Georgia. That's good news. That's our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today. All right, let's get some comments here. I'll go to DawgNation.com first because we had some issues with them before the show began today. So we'll kind of find out what's on their mind. Let's see what else. BMAX says our top teams can beat anybody, but our bottom teams might be able to lose to anybody. In the case of Auburn, that's certainly true, where this just may not be a bad football team again. But as I said before, I'm not going to let that change the fact that I think that Hugh Freeze is kind of brought to Auburn with the idea that eventually can make them more competitive again. If my guess is proven true, that's what's going to happen. But there just may be no evidence of that happening here this year. I thought that Saturday was a pretty telling situation. Let's see what else. Randy Hall wondering about the golden water bottle. We obviously have our Billy Napier swamp water bottle here that we're still very much enjoying. Very funny stuff. BMAX says Bama is a 15.5-point favorite against Wisconsin. Do they cover or not? My initial take on that, BMAC, would be no. Now, we've got time to change our mind before we get towards the end of the week, but my initial take on that would be no. Ken Holcomb on the idea of Texas being number one right now. I like stuff like this because, that's what football fans have always done is sort of debate the rankings week to week. And on the basis of performance, I don't see why Texas should be ranked ahead of Georgia. That doesn't make any sense to me. Georgia on the virtue of a 34-3 thorough dismantling of Clemson, I think that's absolutely justifying, the ranking that Georgia has. I was impressed by Texas, and I've said that, but I don't see anything there that makes me think that Texas should be ranked ahead of Georgia. Obviously, this will work itself out over the course of the season, but I don't see anything right now that would make me believe that Texas should be ranked ahead of Georgia. Let's see what else. DT says that he's with Connor. He didn't learn a lot about Tennessee here this weekend. I'm sorry. If you can't acknowledge that winning a neutral site game 51-10 is a statement. Now, what is it stating? That may be debated. But if you go in a game like that where you didn't, you had some folks kind of talking up NC State a little bit prior to the game. If you win that thing 51-10 and if you do it with defense, because the honest truth is, I'm not even really quite so sure how well Nico played on Saturday. He had a couple of interceptions. This was not the Tennessee offensive show, but this is by far and away the best defense that Heupel has had thus far at Tennessee. And I think it was fair to wonder a couple of seasons ago how much defense they could play given the pace they play at offensively. Well, now, they've got some of that. And look, I think overall, as I said before, I don't think that Tennessee's quite on Georgia's radar as of yet. But is this one of the better teams in the SEC on the basis of what they showed on Saturday? I think it probably is. In other words, I'm all about, hating Tennessee and, making fun of those, delusional Vols fans and things like that. But I'm not going to fail to give credit for what was a pretty impressive win. Caleb Meyer says, we know week in, week out that you're going to have to beat us. We will not beat ourselves, point blank. Yeah, look, and that was kind of the thing that, Connor sort of mentioned about Georgia in 2022 when you look at Michigan this past week, is that Georgia just doesn't give anything away. That, given everything they lost off the 2021 roster, and there were plenty of folks who thought they would take a pretty significant step back in 2022, and they just didn't. They just didn't do it. So given all that, what Caleb says is even more true is that you're going to have to rise to Georgia's level, and you're going to have to sort of play their game against them. To Alabama's credit, they did that in December. But you got to do that to have any chance. I think you're right. Rambo says, overreaction by many to the most recent games played. What does history tell us? DT says the NC State offense is horrendous, doesn't make Tennessee defense good. Yeah, I just think that's certainly not what a lot of the offseason was about with the addition of Grace McCall and things like that. But when your expectation is to win by 8 and you're winning by 40 in a neutral venue, you've done something. You have. You've done something. And we were sort of on this as it relates to Tennessee. I'll also say that. But, at a certain point, you got to give credit where credit's due. Let's see what else. Crow King 123 in the comparison of Georgia and Texas says he thinks that Clemson might be better than Michigan this year. Clemson destroyed Appalachian State. Yeah, a lot of that is going to be kind of the eye of the beholder, and obviously it'll take kind of a full year of comparison to sort of know that one way or another. I guess what I'm saying is I didn't see anything about the Texas win against Michigan that was more impressive than what we saw from Georgia against Clemson. And, is Michigan better or is Clemson better? I think you may be right. I think that Clemson's probably a little bit better than Michigan is, I think. But even with that, Georgia so thoroughly beat Clemson. It was fairly obvious. It was fairly obvious early on. They were not going to probably score a touchdown. They certainly wanted to do enough offensively to win the game. And it was just the nature of how much Georgia just sort of laid it on from the beginning. Now, Texas went out there and put a lot of pressure on Michigan from the word go too. But when Georgia comes into the season as the number one team, it's going to take a lot to say through 2 weeks, boy, Texas has been more impressive. And just on the basis of that Michigan win alone, that's not more impressive than what Georgia's done thus far this year. But we'll find out, obviously, more about these two teams when they face each other head-to-head. Spencer Clark says, could this be the year of the underdog? It just sort of feels funny. Yeah, look, there's obviously going to be more chances for an underdog to win because, schedules are a little tougher. The playoff itself is a little longer. There's going to be more chance for that. And, we're not seeing, maybe Georgia, maybe Texas, maybe Ohio State. We're not seeing a lot of teams that look bulletproof right now. And Ohio State's issues at the quarterback position, we'll see more from Georgia as the level of competition goes up. Maybe even they prove to be incapable of playing great week in, week out. But there is definitely more of an any given, the NFL thing about any given Sunday. There's definitely a little bit more of an any given Sunday type of thing going on now. I think you may be right about that. Jonathan Aaron, on the subject of the NFL being very flag happy. I watched a decent amount of the Falcons on Sunday, 2 hours I'll never get back. My thing on NFL Sundays is, especially my son plays a lot of baseball on Sundays. So like this past week, didn't really get settled in until kind of the second half of that game. And instead of watching Red Zone, I watched a good bit of Falcons, and that's the last time I'll ever make that mistake. But yeah, I have heard there have been a lot of penalties. I think the NFL just gets so legalistic with its rule book sometimes and just sort of makes it more complicated than it needs to be, I think. David Gross on the subject of some of the in-stadium music. Yeah, so the Hot to Go phenomenon, I am not a participant in that, so I couldn't speak much to that. But sounds like you had a positive interaction with Josh Brooks, which we're always happy about. Let's see what else. I probably not a huge surprise to know that I sort of favor clean, family-friendly lyrics when it comes to in-stadium songs. I do sort of favor that. I'm not aware of the lyrics of the Hot to Go song. I didn't really realize that was even a thing. Yeah, so I don't know if you. Yeah, it certainly seemed to be that way on Saturday, but I was not aware of the lyrics. But I would, generally speaking, favor family friendly lyrics when it comes to stuff like that in the stadium. Let's see what else is going on in the YouTube comment section here. Foster Moss says they're giving very funny stuff. JC also pointing out Miami looking pretty good so far. Yeah, I mean, what Miami did against Florida, once again, the same type of thing. We would say that Florida's not very good, but to go into the Swamp and win by that much, it's like the oldest, most tired thing in the world is when a college football game happens early in the season. Well, is so-and-so good or is so-and-so just this bad? But you could do that with anything. People could do that with Georgia. Is Georgia good or is Clemson just this bad? The truth is well, obviously you can't be great if you're on the wrong end of a 30-point, drubbing, but at the same time, to be capable of even beating a bad team by 30 points is, it takes something to be able to do that. And so, that's just kind of the overall standard when it comes to college football is that, we think Florida's obviously pretty bad, but Miami going into a hostile environment and making them look that bad still says something for the positive about Miami. And I do think that Miami right now, they're certainly by appearances, the standard bearer in the ACC, I think we would say. Let's see what else. Spencer Clark says that Wisconsin might play some big boy football in the trenches. Things could get sticky. This is a little bit different kind of Wisconsin team, though. Now, Luke Fickell is obviously sort of a physical-minded coach, but they've also tried to open up things offensively a little bit there in Wisconsin. So this is not quite the Ron Dane Wisconsin of the old days up there at Madtown right now. So I don't know quite how much brute physicality Wisconsin's bringing to the table, but the overall point may still be true, which, for Wisconsin, this may be their whole season. Let's see what else. Keith Fold says, I love our Bab O'Reilly song. Yeah, I do as well. It's one of the things that I sort of don't like about the new Georgia press box is it's glass enclosed now. And you can hear it a little bit. But, Georgia was one of the last press boxes in, college football that was totally open where you could hear all of the game day environment. You can still hear a decent amount now. But I used to always love, that, the way the crowd would cheer when Kirby would say, let's attack the day, and the song would play. You don't quite get to hear that quite as well. I'm gonna miss all of that because some of that game day stuff is just not going to be the same in the new press box, and I will miss that because I still think that Bab O'Reilly gets it going good. Let's see what else. Travis McCullough says Ohio State ain't bulletproof BA. Yeah, certainly when it comes to, quarterback issues, offensive line issues, perhaps that's maybe the case. William Camacho says he's going to be having a medium well Bevo steak burger on October 19th. That's for sure. Very funny stuff there. Let's see what else is going on. Al Chandler also talking about the Bevo thing from a couple of years ago, which is very funny. All right, a few final comments. We'll get ready to wrap it up here for today. Dave Snow says it's going to be offline the next couple of days as they're moving. Is it Australia? Is that right? Is that where you're moving to? You may have coming to the USA. Okay, yeah, so just a typo there. Well, Dave, I know you kind of mentioned this to us one time before. We'll be glad to have you back stateside, and that's all really good stuff. I'm glad you're coming back here. BMAX says, like to see Georgia blow open the game, but if rain is in the forecast, probably 24-0's more likely. Yeah, something along those lines. That's about what I would sort of see it being there on Saturday. Scott Harris mentioning the 2021 game when, Kentucky was playing like it was the 7th game of the World Series, like the Super Bowl, there at the end trying to score that touchdown. It's so funny. It's like, Kirby, as even yesterday, kind of acknowledged he's friends with Mark Stoops. That's the sort of thing that you could imagine would make Kirby mad if a different coach did it. But in this particular case, when it comes to Stoops, it seems to be kind of okay with him. But they were playing very hard there at the end to score that touchdown. I think you could probably say to make the game closer than experts thought it might be. There was definitely a lot of energy at the end of that Georgia-Kentucky game in 2021. There definitely was. Let's see what else. Shane Holiday says he hung out with some Wisconsin fans in the pool on the DawgNation crew. Is going to be rooting for the Badgers this weekend. Yeah, that'll be kind of fun. I remember that, Shane. That'll be kind of fun. You meet some folks like that in a situation. You kind of always sort of reminded of that. And obviously, anytime against Alabama, always kind of fun to root against the Crimson Tide. So there you go. Randy Hall asking about a get-together here at some point in time for DawgNation. I hope that's the case. I know we got a lot on our schedule here right now with all these DawgNation Invasion events, so I'm not quite so sure when the next one of those is going to be, Randy, but I would certainly love to do that soon. I actually talked to some folks the other day to let them know that we got a lot of people that want to do a get-together here soon, around the Atlanta area here. So at some point in time, hopefully we can do that, but I don't know when that'll be. John McAleer says it saddens me that BA doesn't understand why they fought hard for that touchdown. What did I miss about that, John? What did I miss about that? Jonathan Aaron says, come on now, BA. We all know you want to dance and play the air trumpet to Narcos. Listen, that song was everywhere a couple of years ago, right? It was everywhere a couple of years ago. Kayla Meyer says, can you choose to be on the sideline? How does that work? So last year, there's obviously a lot fewer sideline spots than press box spots. And so last year, one of the things that I experimented with is, like anything in life, I think it's important to try to add to your skill set. And so one of the things I want to try to add to my skill set is I don't have a lot of experience with like shooting video, like being like a photographer basically. And so last year I wanted to try to do that. And so I had reached out to Georgia to ask, could I be on the sideline? And I wanted to try to do that. Well, the truth is like, obviously with more practice, anybody could become better, but I'm not a great photographer. Like the video I was shooting for the most part was not really video we could use on the air here. And now we have Cody Chaffins, and Cody's a terrific photographer, kind of world-class in that category. So there's really no point for me in doubling up the work that he's already doing. So I did make the decision to kind of go back to the press box this year. If I could just stand on the sideline and not worry about shooting the video, would I probably enjoy that better? I guess I probably would, but you kind of need to leave the sideline so the people are actually doing work on the sideline. Last year I was trying to. This year, I just sort of realized that I need to leave that work to be done by people who do it well. So I'm kind of back in the press box. So that's kind of the long answer to that. Is like last year I was on the sideline a pretty good bit. But I'm just not shooting video here this year because we have someone who's very good at that. You don't really need me to do that anymore. Frank Batter says you can say all you want about Brock Vandagriff, but never forget his pickup truck needs his own statue for all the help he brought to Georgia. Yeah, with those recruits who were visiting. But he had a great photo that came out of the Vandagriff pickup. That's a really good point. A lot of great dogs ended up as a part of that. And like a lot of people will tell you that, Vandagriff was very well liked by his teammates. Very, very just kind of respected, involved in like the FCA and things like that. Just really a very respected guy. Colby Strotter says, hope we don't get beat up too bad. Kentucky's always physical. And I think that's ultimately one of the things that I think that's one of the things that Kirby probably respects about Mark Stoops is the fact they have kind of found a way to be so physical. Now, for a long time, that included a really good offensive line. And as we've talked about now a couple of times, that's not quite the case here, probably this year, but we'll see. Let's see what else. Jack Legg says he just picked at the Hurricane schedule. He says, gracious, that's a joke. Yeah, I mean, somebody from the ACC is going to go to the playoff. And, obviously getting a chance to beat up on ACC teams right now, it appears on paper that Miami may be more ready to do than anybody else is. Jonathan Aaron says if you could get rid of any one, which one it would be, Rocky Top or the Rooster? That's always crowing at South Carolina. I mean, Rocky Top would be the answer because they play that so much. It's crazy how much they play that. Plus, I've sort of said this before. I've always had a little bit of respect for South Carolina and its fans, just given the fact that they find a way to be, into the games, despite the fact that most years they're just not very good, and yet they kind of shake it off and come back and make noise again. In a weird way, I have a little bit of respect for that. Chief J, or I should say, I always mess this up. It's not Chief J, it's Chef J. Bowen. Chef J. Bowen says we need Sam Pittman to come back as an analyst. My guess is when it's all said and done for Sam Pittman, he's going to go sit by the lake. That's what my guess is. He's made a good bit of money. Head coaching money is really good. My guess is, unless you can get him to do some Zoom meetings, that when it ends for Sam here this year, if that's when it does end, I believe it probably will, he's going to go sit by the lake and enjoy himself, and maybe he's earned the right to do that. Greg Hendrick says, looking forward to seeing you on Saturday here in Lexington. Greg, I'm looking forward to seeing all of you there as well. We're going to try to get there early and be walking around, so hopefully we'll get a chance to see as many Georgia fans as possible. Crow King says he's glad he's not a Falcons fan. Yeah, that was a rough game on Sunday. And, I feel like an idiot for sort of buying into the optimism, but I really thought, and listen, it's obviously one game in the NFL is not anything, but the next couple of weeks, both, Philadelphia and Kansas City, really tough, stretch now after letting one get away against Pittsburgh. I sort of feel pretty silly for buying into the optimism for Atlanta. B-Mac asks if Pittman is from Arkansas. Yeah, he is from Arkansas. I got that, that one picture, beautiful lake house there, the big hog statue out in front. It's a really cool, these pictures are all online. It's really cool home right there on the lake there. Beautiful. Randy Hall says that a sideline view is not as good as an elevated view. In some cases, that is true. In some cases, that is true. You can kind of sometimes on the sideline sort of work, like if you'll notice, there's the team area that usually stretches to about the 20-yard line or so. If you really try, you can almost kind of nudge your way in almost near the 20-yard line, which is not a bad way to see it. And that can kind of turn into an okay view at times. So I've had some good experiences when I've been lucky enough to watch the game from the sideline, and I love the atmosphere. To me, the atmosphere of a game is part of the story, and you get a much better feel for that down on the sideline. I do like that part a lot. These new press boxes are just not my preference, which sounds so like, first world problems. I do realize that. But, the new press boxes in all stadiums, they're very high, they're glass enclosed. They're just removed from the action, and nobody cares about, me whining about that. I'm not even trying to whine. I'm just being honest, is that, there's a lot about being down on the field that is really good, but it's probably appropriate to leave that for the true working media down there. Martino Dawgs asking about, so there's no official DawgNation tailgate on Saturday, but we are going to be trying to be there and be moving about there a little bit. So let us know where you are. Maybe we'll try to come by and say hello to you, but no official tailgate on Saturday. But we do have a huge DawgNation invasion coming to Tuscaloosa in a couple of weeks. Senior Dog says, I hope our red zone offense is better in Lexington than it was a couple of years ago. Yeah, the 2022 game when it was so cold, that was not a thing of beauty. That was not a thing of beauty. Rambo says, I love the open press box and the associated sounds. Inside a skybox was weird, like watching a game on TV instead of being there. Yeah, I've only been to like the Sanford Stadium Sky Suite like one time. Man, it's so quiet up there. It's really weird. It is high, and it's very quiet. And it's also really nice, too. But that's not my preference for Georgia football. I want to be in it. And, of course, Georgia was eventually going to take that press box space and give that to something else. It's too valuable real estate not to. I totally understand that. Of course they were going to do that. But I'm still going to be sad that I don't have that spot anymore. I mean, like, you couldn't have had a better seat for these games than I used to have. Such a good seat, like right there at the 50-yard line, like in the stadium, all of the noise around you. Now, a lot of the riders, they don't want that noise. They're, over there, worried about semicolons and stuff like that. They don't want to, deal with all of that. But I'm there to, like, soak up the vibes. And, Sanford Stadium used to be a perfect place for that. Now, to Georgia's credit, they've made the new press box a very welcoming place. There's nothing wrong with the press box. It's a very welcoming place. It was very comfortable on Saturday. It is more spacious in some respects, I think, than the other one was in the seating area. That's definitely true. You got a place to put your bag, things like that, for instance. But, of course, I'm going to be sad about what was lost. I mean, I'm a little different than a lot of these media types in that, I'm a football fan. I'm a Georgia fan. And so I would say that the new press box is probably a really good experience for, like, the true working media. And for someone like me, there's probably a little something lost. All right, couple of final things we're going to go. Miriam Corbin says, I'm with you on being in the game and in the moment. There's nothing like it. Yeah, I mean, and like what I find is that, because I like to go when I'm exercising, believe it or not, every now and then I do try to exercise. Sometimes, like, those last little miles or last little steps or whatever, they're kind of hard. And so I like to, like, throw on, like, some football stuff on YouTube to sort of get me through it, kind of get me fired up. And I'll go try to find, like, fan videos of, like, fun stuff that's happened for Georgia football. To me, for whatever reason, the way the phone records the games never quite feels to me the way it felt in the moment. I don't think the crowd noise is properly captured. I think the TV has what they call, like, the big, like a parabola style microphones that kind of like a half circle. That probably captures the crowd noise a little bit better. But that's not quite as raw. You sort of wish there was something a little bit more raw that felt a little bit more real. I always think that the YouTube videos of, like, fun moments shot by fans kind of undersells the experience a little bit. But living through some of that kind of stuff, it's just awesome. Like, a couple of those moments from the Tennessee game in 2022, I still think about that, about how rain's pouring down. It's a big third down. Like the Javon Bullard sack, like big third down or fourth down, crowd gets louder, and then it gets louder, and then it gets louder just before the snap. I used to love stuff like that. Love stuff like that. Grady Darcy, thank you for the kind words. Grady, I really appreciate that. Grady, thank you very much. I truly appreciate that indeed. That's very nice of you. Kyle Cummings, the DawgNation cruise is 4 nights. Yeah, so we embark on a Monday and we come back on a Friday. So it's a 4-night cruise. A 4-night cruise. All right, boy, it's getting late. Let's get out of here. All right, final stuff here. Back on YouTube one more time. Anything else? Johnny Surfdog says the Kentucky game is a great opportunity for interior defensive tackles to dominate and gain some confidence and momentum for the rest of the year. I think that's right. Continue to rotate bodies and play them. I think that could be there. I think that could be good there too. TJ Smith says, I sat in the Sky Suites for a game last year and really liked sitting in my normal seats better. Yeah, I would say that's kind of true for me. The area below the Sky Suites, I believe it's called the Sky Club. One time I got to sit there. I thought that was pretty nice. It's high, but it's open. They have, like, the free concessions. That was really pretty nice. And I'm sure it's pretty expensive to sit there too. But I probably liked that better than the suites. What's crazy is those suites are like millions of dollars now. I mean, it's crazy how expensive they are. But, for a certain kind of person, they want the luxury. Like, I want to sit in, like, the aluminum bleacher and feel the intensity of the game. But, some people want the luxury. And I guess it's kind of nice to have all options available for people, I reckon. All right, we're going to go for now. Thank you all for being here today. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised, including if your water heater goes out, they get it replaced for you the same day. Because, listen, plumbing issues, emergency pops up, you want it taken care of very, very quickly. And story after story, that is what R.S. Andrews has been doing for people just like you and our audience now for a great number of years. So please find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then.